Hi everyone, this is Passport Necessary. I'm Layla Gentil,
And I'm Marcus Rosati.
and today we are going to be talking about food. So, for anyone who's still new to Passport Necessary, this is a podcast that is dedicated to going into different topics for third culture kids, also known as TCKs, which is a term that we will be using a lot on this podcast. Um, so, food. Food is a huge topic, and we're definitely going to be doing more than one episode on it.
Yep.
Um, you lived in mostly in Japan. I lived in a bunch of different countries, but I was thinking to start off like, what is a food that you crave like all the time? Like now that you're in England, what's something that you miss a lot?
I regularly crave udon. That's one of the things. That's the big one.
Udon, but not soba, not ramen.
Soba's alright. No, it's just udon. I don't know what I always loved that. It's just something to do with it. You got the soup, you got the noodles, you got whatever flavourings you want with it, food stuff. So it's all great. It's just lots of different styles of food in this bowl of noodles with soup. It's just there's just something really nice about it.
Yeah, I never really got into udon just because I
Mm.
am gluten free. So
Right. Yeah.
it was something where like I tried it once or twice because it was the only thing that came with the meal. Like especially if we did a traditional Japanese meal and we were going somewhere special, it was like I'm not gonna refuse. But I actually am very partial to soba. There's something about the really thin noodle, the buckwheat flavor. Like I love that, especially cold soba. I know there are a
Yeah.
lot of people who are really into the hot noodles, and that's a huge thing, and ramen's super popular. I was a really big fan of all the cold noodles. There was something about it I loved.
Yeah, because it's like particular summer one, the somen as well, wasn't there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
which is a good one,
loved somen. So
especially in
good.
summer.
Oh my gosh. When it's so hot outside and all you can think about is like eating cold food, and then they literally serve you noodles with ice in it. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is the way to live.
Yeah, one of the best inventions ever.
Oh my gosh. A thing that I miss a lot was just easy access to really, really fresh fish. Like,
Oh yeah,
like going out and getting sushi or getting different types of fish based meals that were fresh and delicious and weren't that expensive. Like that was something that I really miss because here in the US whenever you get fish it's always like on the part of the menu that's way more expensive. Like they're always
mm.
going to upcharge you a little bit because there's fish in it. And I
Yeah.
loved in Japan where it was like, "Oh, you want seafood? Here, it's like really not that expensive. Have it."
There's also good quality as well. They know what they're doing with it.
Oh yeah, it was never like, "Oh, here's tuna in a can." It was like really fresh fish.
This is what it looks like for real.
Yeah, that was one thing I remember. One of I think it was maybe my second year in Japan, so I was already in Kobe, and I think I knew you by then. But when I was in Kobe, we once in a while we would have American families who would be new, so we would try and like help them out and
Yeah.
bring them to different places. And I remember there was one family who had kids who were kind of like around my age, so I took them to an area near where we used to live, Sannomiya, and I showed them like all these different restaurants and places. And there was a restaurant, we didn't go there, but we walked past it and they had a fish tank in front of it.
Ah.
And they were like, "Oh, look at all the pretty fish." And I was like, "Yeah, it's really cool because you get to pick the fish you want to eat." They were like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, you pick the fish you want. They'll take it into the back. They'll cook it, serve it up to you." And they were so astonished that people like that it was that fresh. That it was literally like you pick the fish, you kill it, you eat it. It like shocked them completely, and they were really kind of grossed out by it. And I was like, "That's how you know it's fresh. Like it's
Yeah.
literally in the water 15 minutes before you eat it."
I suppose it's also quite an honest way of doing it as well, isn't it?
Mm?
You just know it's an honest way of doing it. You just know exactly what it is, where it's been for a
Mm-hmm.
while anyway. And yeah, it's also you know exactly what you're eating.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There were a couple times when I was living in Japan where I didn't always know what I was eating because
Mm.
sometimes they were roots. Um,
Right.
like you would eat like a root and you're like, what is this? And they're like, just eat it. And I was like, okay. Hope I don't die. Actually, that happened to my mom with really bad consequences.
Oh dear.
She went to an event and they were serving like a bunch of different dishes, and my mom ate one of them, and then later that night got like severely ill, like really really
Right.
sick. And the next day, like she went back to work. I don't know how she managed to do that, but she went to work and she was like, everything I knew in that meal, there was like all these things I knew exactly what they were, but there was this one dish I didn't know what it was. I think that's what made
Right.
me sick. So she asked the local women who like worked in her office, and they were like, "Oh, that's jellyfish."
Oh.
Yeah, so then that's
Right.
how my mom and I both found out. I had a later incident with jellyfish, but we very quickly learned both of us are very allergic to eating
Oh no.
jellyfish. Yeah.
What a way to find out.
Oh yeah, I also ate fugu once,
Oh right. Yeah.
without knowing what fugu was. Fugu, to anyone who doesn't know, is a blowfish that is very
Mm.
popular in Japan to eat. By the way, it doesn't taste really like
No.
anything. It's a very bland tasting fish, but
Yeah.
it's exciting to eat because if it is not prepared properly, if you don't take out the ovaries in the female, and I believe the liver in the male,
Hmm.
blowfish, you die. Like it's
Yeah.
incredibly poisonous, and there's no cure for it. And like
Yeah.
hundreds of people every year die in Japan because they eat poorly prepared fugu. But hundreds might be very high, but people do die decently often from eating this poorly prepared
Pois-
fish.
Yeah.
I had no idea I was eating it. I was just like, oh, this is sashimi. This is fine. It's kind of boring. I don't know why they're serving it. And then the lady was like, oh, you ate that? And I was like, yeah, it's, boring fish. And she was like, oh, that was fugu. And I was like, no one warned me that I could have died tonight. Thank you.
Just skirting past the edge of death, I survived.
Oh my gosh. Actually, the country where I feel like I ate the most, like, I don't want to say weird because it's not weird. It was just things I wasn't always aware of what I was eating, was when I was very little and living in South Korea,
Hmm.
because they eat way more root vegetables and way more like pickled and cured and like preserved foods. That's very part of the traditional eating experience. So there were a
Yeah.
lot of times when I was living in South Korea when I was little, like I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I would eat things where I was like, I don't know what this is, and I'll just eat it. I think that's why I'm not a picky eater. It was like, you have to try it. You at least try it. If you
Yeah.
haven't tried it, you can't say you don't like it.
Exactly.
So I basically ate almost everything. Was
I
there?
think
Go ahead.
I think it does help though, like if you're exposed to a lot of different stuff as a child, to like being able to eat. It just gives you a very broad diet. You can eat almost anything without being too worried about it, unless you've got an allergy, of course.
Yeah.
But it does seem to make a difference. I mean, to me, I'm not a particularly fussy eater, generally speaking.
Same.
But I think maybe the Japanese and maybe sort of like maybe Far East Asian diets are very much more broad.
I think it's out of necessity because,
Yeah.
especially Japan, it's a landlocked country, not landlocked, it's an island country.
Yeah.
So they have to, make do with what they have. And for a long time, you couldn't just like go and trade. Like they literally isolated themselves. So it was like,
Yeah.
you just got to make do with what you got.
I mean, it's also that the land's not particularly good for growing stuff either because it's all mountains, so you can't have these wide open pastures.
Yeah.
So you can't have cattle in the same way as you would in Europe or the States.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. I suppose you could have goats and sheep, but it's a bit difficult if you've got to chase sheep across a mountain. Because they do
And-
move.
Well, those aren't very native. They're not native to Japan, but like
No.
they have other ways, like the fact that fish is such a predominant part of the diet. I think it really does enable a much like leaner style of eating, whereas
That's
like
true.
Western diet is a lot heavier because most of our proteins come from redder meats like pork and beef. Chicken is fairly popular as well, but like most people, when you ask them like what meat do you want to eat, they're probably going to lean towards a redder meat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree, it's really flavorful and I love red meat, but there is really something to be said for like a really well prepared fish is like
Yeah.
hits the spot. I was gonna ask, are there any foods either from Japan or from England that you like abhor? You like do not want to eat it, you really don't like it, and like you tried it, you gave it its fair shake, but you were like, I do not like this food.
I think the only thing I've ever eaten that I said I probably wouldn't want to eat again would be kidney.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing. But then also, I suppose I haven't got a sweet tooth for sort of like European sweets. I don't like eating the chocolate bars or anything like that because it's just too much. It's too sweet, and it's sweet in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas sort of like in Japan, you would get sort of like mochi and stuff like that, and that kind of sweet stuff was all right. It didn't feel like too much.
You kind of grew up with a soft sweetness instead of that very, very accentuated, almost artificial sweetness.
Yeah, and it's just much more pleasant. I think the flavours are different. You've got much more to go along with it. That's quite nice. The texture's nicer as well, I find. But that's for me. So I really don't have a sweet tooth. I can't eat sweet things.
Mm-hmm. So Halloween is like the worst time of year for you.
Yeah, pretty much. No, I enjoy Halloween, but not the sweets.
Yes. I think for me, there were like very few things I did not like when I was in Japan. I do not like natto. I tried it.
Oh, yeah.
I gave it its fair shake. There's something about the sliminess of it. It's super fermented. Maybe I've changed and I've gotten older and I maybe really would like it now. But when I lived there, I just could not get myself to eat it. I tried sea cucumber. That was an awful experience just texture-wise because I don't think it really tasted like much. But it was just the fact that, like, for anyone who's never had sea cucumber, it has the texture of when it first enters your mouth, it's very, like, soft, almost like a scallop. Like, it really is this very soft texture. But when you bite into it, it hardens like a rock. And you literally can't bite through it. And so I thought I was going to choke to death, so I actually had to spit it out. It was really awful. And I felt so bad because there was literally the chef, like, right in front of me because we had it at a sushi place, like a real sushi place. And I was just like, I'm so sorry. And I had to, like, spit it out in front of them. I was like, I'm so sorry. And he thankfully, like, laughed it off and thought it was really funny. Like, ha ha ha, foreigner who can't eat sea cucumber. But it was like, it's the most visceral reaction I've ever had to a food, texture-wise. It was, my body instantly went, nope, get this out of the body right now. I've never
can't handle this.
Oh, it was so gross. I can't do any sort of innards. I have tried. My dad has tried. Every, like, couple years, he'll be like, I'm gonna make liver, and he makes it, and he's so proud of it, and then he'll serve it to me, and I can't eat it. It's so gross. There's something about the I think it's a mixture of texture and the, like, overwhelming metal flavor.
Yeah.
But, like, any sort of innards kind of creep me out. I've been able to eat chicken heart, and that was actually pretty good. I like that. That had a good texture, flavor, all of it was fine. Any other sort of innards, I skip them immediately. I'm like, I can't do that. Sorry. I'm pretty explorative, but not innards. Sorry, go ahead.
You do have the thing in English of saying that something is complete tripe, which means it's disgusting. That's like,
and it's not wrong.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I'm actually, I just like, there were a lot of things where I was like, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try it. And that was something that also in Guatemala, innards are very common. They serve that too. I just couldn't do it. It, like, really grossed me out so bad. And actually, living in Guatemala, we had certain, like, foods that we had to be very careful with because there are certain, like, bugs that will live on plants and vegetables. So that was one of those countries where you would have to bleach your veggies just to
Okay.
make sure that they were absolutely clean. Because unfortunately, my mom was, for some reason, had the worst time of it. She got like Giardia 3 times while we were living in Guatemala. No one else in the
Right.
family had that bad of a stomach issue, but like my mom suffered so badly. Meat was fine though. Oh my god, you wanted
Okay.
meat? Guatemala had you down. It was so freaking good. And the fruits there were spectacular.
Ah.
But
What
for
sort of meats?
vegetables, nope.
What sort of meats do they have? I mean, what are they keen on?
Chicken was really popular just because,
Mhm.
I mean, they're pretty easy to raise and they kind of are everywhere. There would be beef, but that was considered more of a like special occasion because beef
Yeah.
takes a lot to, raise and grow. Um, Goat and sheeps were pretty
Right.
popular. I grew up eating a bunch of different meats, so like stuff like that really never grossed me out. I remember when I first started dating my partner, I was like, oh, I really want to make like a rabbit stew because my mom makes this
Oh,
amazing rabbit stew.
yeah.
It's really really good, and he was like, I don't think I could eat that. I was like,
Oh,
oh, okay,
come on.
that's fine. I think for him, it's the bones. There's so many bones in
That's
rabbit.
true.
It is
That's
kind of
true.
a pain in the ass. You really have to like be careful. But I think it's also out of necessity. A lot of countries, you know, we're pretty privileged in the States and in I think in the Western world in general
Mm.
where because we have so much space, we can just kind of grow whatever we want. And I'm in the States, we're really bad about like overgrowing, like making too much food and then people don't eat it.
Yeah.
But I think in many countries, like in Guatemala and Japan, when I was in South Korea, like you really have to make do with what you have, or you have to get imports, and those imports are very expensive.
Yes.
So learning to eat on the market is huge. Like we knew a lot of people through the embassy who actively would make sure that they could get American foods. Like they always wanted
Ah,
very
right. Yeah.
specific American foods that they would order and would get shipped into the country. But it's expensive. And for us in the family, it was like, we'll just do what we can with what we have.
Yeah.
That might be the way my mom was raised. Like she's really Louisiana in that style where it's like, you've got what you
Yeah.
got, figure it out. Like you can make a dish out of anything. Um, I think
Yeah.
that's why I cook that way too.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that's interesting is that because you certainly think of like particularly with the French, they're very happy to eat almost anything within
We eat
reason.
snails.
Yeah. And the yeah.
And I love
And
snail. It's so good.
yeah. But yeah, they're nice. It's all right. It's just basically it's a mollusk. It's fine. It's like
Yeah.
it's kind of like a clam, I suppose, in a way. Not quite, but yeah. But it's like the Japanese will eat all sorts of stuff as well. Like English people are much more worried about stuff, and I'm not sure why. Because there used to be a tradition of doing things like eating pheasant, rabbit, and all that sort of stuff. But then maybe I think somehow I'm not sure what it is, but maybe it's people don't want to eat them anymore. As well as I get the idea that maybe sort of in other Western European countries are less worried about what they're eating.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter what animal it is; it matters whether it's prepared correctly.
Mhm.
More
Do you think it's
adventurous.
become like the UK has become more sanitized to that in the sense that they they feel more comfortable eating very specific type of what would be considered like farm animals and anything outside of that makes them feel nervous?
Yeah, I think that's true, and I also there's probably also a lot of the class system based in it as well. Maybe there's some stuff that's considered that as yeah, this is not for the likes of us. We don't eat that sort of stuff, or we can get hold of it because it's more expensive.
Mhm.
It's a strange one with food in the UK. Because everybody likes this sort of they like to be able to say that they go out to dinner and all that sort of stuff and they know what they're doing, but at the same time people are not very adventurous.
Mhm.
Italian food is always one of the ones that people want to say that's like, oh yeah, I'm sophisticated because I eat Italian. That's fine because Italian food's great, but I mean it's always very specific. You have huge numbers of Italian restaurants, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them are not really very Italian.
Mm.
It's the same thing like with sushi as well. People go, oh yeah, we love going to Yo Sushi, and you're like, yeah. You do realise that what they've done is they basically skimp on everything, including the fish.
Yeah.
So the bit that you actually want to eat is not even that good. It's interesting. It's just like, I think in the UK food is for show. It's not about how it tastes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about whether it's actually good or not. It's about, well, I do this, so I'm sophisticated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the enjoyment of the food that's important. It's being seen to be eating the food that's important. I think, sort
Okay.
of.
Interesting.
That's my impression. That's my impression. It's just because of the way people talk about it. It seems to be at the moment specifically sort of more to do with Italian food. That tends to be the one
That people
people-
find really popular and really like yummy
Yeah.
for some reason, or not
Yeah.
even yummy, but like a show of
It's trendy.
yes trends.
You're in
That's
the
what I
know.
was thinking.
You're
of.
in the know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a
That's so-
sophisticated human being.
That's so interesting because in the States, Italian food is kind of seen as like middle of the road. Like anyone can get Italian food. Like we have like Olive Garden and places like that where it's like
Yeah.
there are pared down versions of Italian food, and like almost everyone in the States can make some sort of, even if it's not truly authentic, but they can make some sort of version of Italian food. So I feel
Yeah.
like that's kind of become part of the American food repertoire. That's so interesting that in the UK it's considered like, ooh, kind of fancy, whereas in the States we're like, yeah, it's pasta. Like, what? Why is it fancy?
I think it might be something to do with the fact that the States, because it has so many different European groups coming across. So you have British people. Well, I'll break it down. Sort of like English, Welsh, Scots, and Irish. Sort of like from the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, that kind of area as it is now. You'd have Italians, you'd have Germans, French people. It would all different groups that would go across, and they would take everything with them. Whereas, I think when Italians migrated to the UK, sort of around the Victorian age, they were a small group of people, and they weren't necessarily considered. They didn't bulk up the population. People don't talk about Italian heritage in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I've got an Italian last name, they don't talk about their Italian heritage at all. It's a different thing. There is an attitude that's different. So Italian is still seen as slightly exotic, but also, I think, certainly within Britain, there's an attitude towards people who come like from Italy, Spain, and France, is that they're all a bit sort of excitable and a bit, too loud or whatever. And it's strange, but they're seen like that. But it's odd because like Europe to most people in the UK seems very exotic. It's also the kind of place you go on holiday and that sort of thing. So if you eat the food, it means that you kind of, I think there is a sense that I'm in the know. I know about this kind of food. I know what I'm doing. Whereas you get a lot of chains that pop up of like Italian chains, and it's just really strange because food-wise, it's just like it's the joke is that it's prepared by microwave technicians. Put it in a plate, put it in the microwave, out it comes. Hey, off we go.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing for a lot of it. It's not all of it, but I think there is that sort of. It's there in the culture, but you walking around York. I mean, the city I'm living in at the moment, there are loads of Italian places, or Italian places, saved in quotation marks. But it's seen as being slightly sophisticated.
Interesting. That's so funny. I think here, when it comes to like sophisticated foods, it just depends on like the quality of service and then like how high end the food is being prepared. I don't
Right.
think there's necessarily a style of food that's considered more like necessarily fancy than others. I think French food is still considered fancy, but I mean there's like fancy Chinese places, there's fancy Thai places. Like it all depends on the style of the restaurant, the style of the service that you're getting, and then like the quality and level of the food. Because there's also like really cheap stuff too of all different kinds. Like you can get cheap Thai, cheap Chinese. Honestly, a lot of the time when it comes to, I hate like saying the ethnic food, quote unquote, but stuff that is non-Western. So stuff like Thai, Burmese, Chinese. A lot of the times the places that are more like mid-level, they're not like super super cheap and they're not super super expensive. The places that are kind of in the middle usually have the best flavor in them, because a lot of the times when they're too fancy, they sometimes westernize the flavors and they'll dial down the heat, or they'll dial down certain flavors and textures so that it's more palatable to Americans. And I prefer, like, me personally, I prefer like the real strong spicy flavor. Like, I love having Vietnamese food or Thai food that like could potentially make me cry from how spicy it is. Like, I don't mind having to have that spice level, because that's what it really is supposed to taste like, and that's the best stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like going back into the 90s. There was a TV series called Goodness Gracious Me, and essentially what happens in this sketch is they reverse the roles. So in Britain there was always this idea that, you know, you always get very drunk and then disappear off to the Indian restaurant and then misbehave and, you know, upset the waiters a bit. What they did was they flipped it around. So basically they've got an English restaurant in India, and so, but one of the lines that they have in there is like, you know, what have you got that's not totally tasteless, not totally bland? It's just because English food is always considered to be totally bland. It is good English food, but I think it's been destroyed in certain senses. It's like it you know, it's things like pies and stews and stuff like that, so people kind of see it as being a bit unsophisticated. Even though it's perfectly nice to have a good steak and ale pie, it's just that, you know, it's considered, I don't know, maybe a bit sort of too rustic.
Yeah,
You know?
I think some of the best English food I've ever had, and trust me, I definitely paid for it because it absolutely had gluten in it, but was all like pastry-based stuff, like pies and different cakes. Like, my favorite English thing that I've ever had and I've ever done is high tea. And that's like, not, I like, it's kind of fancy, but when you really break it down and look at the components of a high tea, it's just like little cakes, little sandwiches. It's nothing like too crazy. It still can get fancy, but like, it's very like carb and bread heavy, but if it's done really well, it's amazing. Like, real English scones, you cannot beat that with a stick. Like, real English scones are truly amazing, and I love it so much. It's one of my favorite things to experience in the UK is going to high tea. I love it.
It is also kind of one of the jokes about, like, you know, going back to the days of the British Empire. It's like when everything's falling about around you, all you're doing is sitting there. So, are we gonna, you know, oh God, you know, we're in the middle of a battle. What are we gonna do? Tea time. Yeah, tea time. It's all right. Bullets flying around. It's one of the jokes. It's just it's been a joke for a very long time.
I think
but nothing's gonna stop it.
I think that was a joke in Blackadder when they did the season that was set in World War One. There was an episode where shit was going down, and I think they decided to have high tea, or they were like pretending to have high tea. I can't remember the exact episode, but I remember it being really funny. Also,
there was one named Blackadder that did that.
I just love Atkinson. He's so great.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what a genius of comedy. Everyone knows him as Mr. Bean. Check out Blackadder. He is incredible, especially the last season.
Yes, I mean, the other one that you've got to look at is one of the ones that he first got famous for was early 80s, which was called Not the 9 O'Clock News, which was a sketch show. Well
I've
worth
heard
watching.
of that. I have heard of that. I need to watch that.
There's some stuff now that might seem a little bit outdated, but a lot of it is quite funny. It's satire, a lot of it.
Yeah.
But it's good fun.
That's always the thing with like older comedy. You always got to be a little careful with it.
Yeah.
Go with it with the mindset that like this was a different time period, and not everything's gonna be of good taste anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Could you get away with that now? Probably not. Is it still funny? Maybe not, but some of it is. So
Yeah, some of it is.
it's one of those things.
Okay. I actually think that we're kind of getting close to our end time for this episode, but we are going to do another episode on food. We're going to at least do one more episode on food.
Yeah. Probably many more.
yeah, there's so many things to talk about, especially when you're going to a different country. Like, there are so many things you can get that are not going to be in your backyard. Please go out and eat it. Like, be explorative, try something new. So, with that in mind, we're going to close it off for today. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments below. We will try and look at the questions as we move forward and answer some of them when we can. If you want to send them to me personally, you can. My Twitter is at Layla Gentil. That's LeylaGentil. And we will try to respond to your questions through the podcast, or if it's like a quick answer, I'll try and do it on Twitter. And yeah, I think that's it for now.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.